We obviously took a look at the NASW Code of Ethics, and the first one that we really took a look at was the client's right to self-determination. As we mentioned previously, Elvis comes into the hospital and we then opt to do a 72-hour hold to prevent any self-harm or self-injury. We make that decision as a social worker, but we have to look at that. Was it an ethical decision? We decided that yes, it was, but it was something that we would have to evaluate because obviously he has the right to say, no, I don't want to do this, I'm out of here, and kind of, you know, go the opposite direction that we want him to. Two other ethics that we looked at were conflicts of interest and privacy and confidentiality. And on the next slide, I can give you a couple examples of how this relates to present day. So the quote at the bottom is from Dr. Tennant, who was actually on the case of Howard Hughes, who suspectedly died from a drug overdose as well, substance abuse. And he says, famous people like Jackson, Hughes, and Presley had enough money, enough privacy, and severe enough medical problems that they had the need to have physicians at their beck and call. The willingness of physicians to take on this role, in my experience, is tantamount always to having to violate ethical standards. So whether it's influence, whether it's the amount of money that these celebrities have, as a social worker, we would want to be aware of not taking a lot of money to be on staff of a famous person and prescribe whatever they need, and not to be pressured. These people are used to getting what they want when they want it, and so being able to keep the client's interest in mind. It sounds really simple, but here's some examples of where that didn't happen. And then lastly, we really wanted to look at client confidentiality. I was fortunate enough to do my famous person on Catherine Zeta-Jones, which specifically applied to this case because she was famous and she did seek treatment for bipolar II disorder, and someone saw her there and leaked it to the media. So at that point, she had to make the decision, was she going to become spokesperson for this disorder, or was she going to deny it and say that, you know, they made it up and fabricated it? And it would be a similar case with Elvis. We decided on a residential drug treatment program because that intensity would be needed and has shown quite significant and successful. However, we would have to take into consideration his confidentiality and making sure that that information didn't get out, as well as in the 12-step program, that social support network for him would be incredible after completing the residential treatment program, but at the same time, it does jeopardize his confidentiality, being that he is famous and a celebrity. The last thing that we ethically had to consider was we did use medication in the very beginning of our intervention, and the thought of treating, you know, prescription abuse with a prescription, we had to weigh that out and look into a little bit more. So Matt's going to talk a little bit more about our contact with the actual psychiatrist.
So we consulted a psychiatrist, Dr. Miller at Grossmont Hospital, regarding this particular case and how he might prescribe medications. First and foremost, if someone is withdrawing off barbiturates, sedatives, and benzodiazepines, it's essential that they titrate or taper off, because otherwise they could face death, straight withdrawal. Dr. Miller also recommended an atypical antipsychotic during the first few days of withdrawing. This would be Seroquel or something, or maybe like Zyprexa. If the moods remained and he continued to have mood issues, Dr. Miller recommended a more typical mood stabilizer. This would be like Depakote or Librium to kind of help with the moods until he's more tapered off.
And to note, the ones that he mentioned are non-habit forming, so we would definitely be looking for something that wasn't likely to create a whole nother problem on our hands. So that pretty much wraps it up. In conclusion, just to talk a little bit to our group approach and our degree of integration, we actually took a group decision-making approach. We made all decisions regarding the intervention, treatment settings, everything together. That did entail a whole lot more work than we were anticipating, but it was worth it in the end. There were several really long and dynamic team meetings right from the beginning, and there was a lot of varying opinions. For example, the discussion of bereavement versus depression and looking at mood disorders. You know, he had lost his mom, things along those lines. How did those things play a role? As well as, do we diagnose him right away, or do we wait till he sobers up, or how many times do we meet with him before actually discovering a mood disorder, a personality disorder, or things along those lines? So what we did as a group is just, honestly, we read the DSM. We really did dig into it to see what would be applicable. We incorporated our lecture notes and critical thinking to the case to come up with the best solution, which we just presented. And then as far as countertransference, no one reported that in the group except Matt, so he's going to talk a little bit about his experience.
So I've had a few friends in my life that have died from overdose of different substances. I'm not sure in hindsight whether they were accidental or intentional, which kind of creates actually probably more of a challenge in the survivors who are left to kind of deal with the death of a close friend. In the legal and ethical issue, Julianne mentioned the Online Pharmacy Act of 2008. Another name for that is the Ryan Haight Act, and Ryan Haight was one of my friends in high school who overdosed on muscle relaxers and DSM, which is kind of like, it's a pill, but it's a whole bottle of cough syrup in a pill. And he overdosed on that, and I went through a lot of guilt, and I think as social workers, we want to help the clients we work with. When I'm working with a substance abusing client, I kind of feel the pull to help even more, possibly related to countertransference. So it's very important for me to be aware of those issues on a personal level and kind of channel that in a more positive way. I think using MI has been really helpful for me in that regard, because MI talks about detaching oneself from the outcomes. And I think that's really important, and it helps be able to kind of distance myself and use countertransference in a more positive manner.
All right, so we'd like to thank you very much for listening and being such a great audience. At this time, are there any questions about substance abuse or our case?
As far as the outcome, like that you were, I'm just interested in why, I mean, harm reduction, I feel like that's a good preventative thing and a good thing to do as far as like policy and have it available, but is that a good, do you think, or moderation, is that a good outcome you think for like an actual inpatient, outpatient? Because those, I think sobriety is first and foremost when they're actually there, as far as like, I know policy is really important, and it's really important to have those outside services to provide those. Does that make sense? I just didn't know if that was like a...
No, that's a great question. And to clarify, our outcome, our goal was abstinence, but we wanted to outline all three of them that are prominent for substance abuse. And to understand that in this case, for example, Elvis is having some pains. Like his tooth may have truly been hurting. So if there are medications that he does need, perhaps in that case we can't have him complete abstinence from all medications, but that would be the goal. Abstinence was the goal for us. Anybody else?
There's candy in it for you.